You know, one of the wonderful things about the majority of people, not all, but a quite substantial majority, is that we know when something just doesn't pass the smell test, as they used to say. You know, we can see when something's a bit off, and someone is trying to tell us that no, there's nothing to see here. Move along. Have a nice day. We can intuitively tell when something smells rotten in Denmark. By now you all have heard about all of the doings that's been happening in the great state of Tennessee. So we wanted to unpack this, but in a kind of a different way than perhaps what you've been hearing. Well, let's start off with what transpired first. We'll do it that way. Tennessee just recently had a mass shooting. They joined a long and exhaustive list of states just this year alone, you all, that have experienced mass shootings. This happened at an elementary school, similar to Uvalde, only it was a private school. And 3 little 9-year-olds were tragically unalived in this mass shooting, along with teachers and support staff who worked at the school. Now, there's been this debate in America for a long time about common sense gun regulation control versus laissez-faire, ad hoc, run amok, gun ideology. We won't even call it policy because it's mostly ideology. Now, you all, a lot of people on the conservative spectrum are always, after any shooting, especially mass shootings, they always revert back to the Second Amendment and say that there's this entity that wants to remove all Americans from having or owning or operating firearms. Now, I don't know exactly the logistics of how that could ever occur. But that's what the conservative argument in essence has been. That we can't do anything about mass shooters in our country because somehow it would trample, stifle the Second Amendment. Now, if I'm mischaracterizing their ideological argument, please let me know. I don't think I am. Because you had a state lawmaker in Tennessee say, directly after this recent shooting, and I'm paraphrasing, nothing will be done. This came out of this lawmaker's mouth to constituents of Tennessee. Nothing will be done. Now, let's get to what a lot of the constituents are asking to be done. And let's determine if their request or their ask is unreasonable. A lot of the youth who have been protesting for common sense gun regulation, they've been demanding that Tennessee pass similar laws to Florida, not to Chicago, not to New York, not to California, not to Oregon or Washington, but pass similar laws like Florida. You know, this came up after Uvalde, and I think I mentioned it then, but I'll mention it again. When Texas had their mass shooting at Uvalde, it came out that Texas doesn't have any red flag laws. Florida does. Both Texas and Florida are conservative states with conservative governors, conservative state legislatures. But one state decided to do red flag laws. Texas didn't. Now, this is a fact. You know how they say men lie, women lie, but numbers don't lie. This is true. According to many experts in law enforcement in the state of Florida, they say since implementing their red flag laws in the state of Florida, they prevented hundreds of would-be violent attacks. Which would have been carried out using guns. This is not according to me, you all. This is according to many law enforcement agencies throughout the state of Florida. So if you disagree with what I'm saying, you're really disagreeing not with me, but with the experts in Florida. I don't live in Florida. But this has come from them. This is straight from the horse's mouth. Red flag laws have saved lives in the state of Florida. Hundreds of incidents of gun violence have been prevented because of the red flag laws in Florida. So when Texas had their gubernatorial election, you all know I endorse Beto. Because he said, if it's good for Florida, why isn't it good for Texas? Logic. I said, that's reasonable. They're both super conservative. Law enforcement, you know they back the blue. Well, law enforcement in Florida says red flag laws have saved lives. This is a fact. Tennessee, the youth were protesting for red flag laws. They showed up at the state house, which is by definition their house. It's the people's house. So the people of Tennessee some, not all, showed up and were demanding that their legislatures pass similar laws like in another state that's not too far away from it. This is it. Now, here's where it gets kind of interesting before it gets weird and crazy. The majority leader of the Tennessee House said the folks who showed up and were chanting and being disruptive, he called them insurrections. Now, they didn't commit any violence that I'm aware of. They didn't do any property damage that I'm aware of. They didn't come with the intent to do grave bodily harm to anyone working in the institution that I'm aware of. They came to advocate that something be done legally to prevent or mitigate them possibly losing their lives going to school. That's all they did, which is their right as a citizen. You have a right to redress your government. I guess they forget that part of the Constitution. They just skip over it. So that's what the youth did. They didn't assault any law enforcement with flagpoles. They didn't bring zip ties. They didn't erect a noose on the State House grounds. None of that. They just went and chanted and demanded that their lawmakers do something to ensure their safety. Now, I've heard this going about, and I want to address it. Certain people are saying that it's no guarantee that any law would prevent mass shooting. You all, is that really a great thinking process? We're not going to make any law because we're not sure that it would prevent or mitigate what we're trying to stop. Based off of that, following it to its logical conclusion, we shouldn't have any laws because we're not sure that they'll prevent or mitigate people from not following them. Criminals don't abide by the law. No shit, Sherlock. That's what makes them guilty of committing a crime. They're not abiding by the law. But we're not necessarily talking about criminals. We're talking about law-abiding people that would abide by the law. Now, this recent shooter in Nashville at this school was different than a lot of other shooters, you all, in more ways than one. But one difference that I want to draw out and make a distinction about is this. This troubled individual's parents did not want their child to be able to own, operate, or purchase a firearm. This is well documented. Both parents were in agreement. They didn't think this person should own, operate, or purchase a firearm. This person was also receiving therapy. The individual's therapist also believed that it would be a bad idea for the individual to be able to own, operate, or purchase a firearm. Now, because Tennessee does not have any red flag laws where a parent, guardian, or potentially and possibly a licensed therapist could contact the state and put you on a list to not own, operate, or purchase a firearm, this individual was allowed to go to multiple locations, purchase multiple firearms, and you all know what occurred. But it wasn't due to guardians, family, or licensed therapists not wanting to do that, not wanting to put this individual on a list. The state doesn't have a way to do it. So red flag laws, you all, quite possibly could have prevented this tragedy from occurring. I'm not saying that it would have, because the individual always could have gotten a weapon illegally. But we know how the individual purchased the weapons legally. And we know that the parents and the licensed therapist did not want the individual to own, operate, or purchase a gun. But they had no mechanism to prevent it. Red flag laws is not about the police putting you on a list or some politician. It's your family. It's a guardian. It's someone you're receiving care from who's licensed in your state. It's the closest people to you, the people who know you the best, who want to ensure your safety and others' safety, that would be making that choice to inform the state. Because conservatives are trying to act as though red flag laws is the state encroaching on your right. But it's not. It's the people who know you the best saying, hey, I don't think it's a good idea for that individual to own, operate, or purchase a firearm. Now let's think about it like this, you all. Just like you have a black sheep in the family, and you all have a black sheep in the family, you all have someone in your family, maybe multiple people in certain families, who you're like, hell no. You definitely don't want that person having a firearm. We all know people like this. You get on the public bus and somebody is screaming, using misogynistic and racial epithets. They're talking about doing harm to people who they don't know. Do you want that individual to operate a firearm and get on the bus one day with you? Now, I'm going to read the Second Amendment in full. And then I'm going to tell you what I think about it. You might be surprised. The Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay. Some people say it's a slippery slope. You know those folks. Everything is a slippery slope. If you pass red flag laws and somebody just doesn't like you and acts, and they contact the state and they say, hey, Bob, he shouldn't have a firearm. He's a danger to himself and others. Maybe the ex is being vindictive. This is the argument that they'll make. And it's quite possible. They could be. People do lie all the time. But hey, what if the ex is not being dishonest? Now, of course, the person is going to have to list off reasons why they don't want the person to be able to have their Second Amendment right. No parent is going to call the state and say, hey, my child, I don't think they should have a firearm. And not give out specific reasons why. They always get stuck on the part, shall not be infringed. I've had people message me that. Don't you know how to read? Okay. See, this is why you don't want to tussle with someone like me. Because I know exactly what I'm talking about. You all, do you know there's a law in Tennessee that quite possibly is in violation of the Second Amendment? You're going, what the heck? How is Tennessee in violation of the Second Amendment? I said possibly, because I don't know if this has ever gone to the Supreme Court. They're the final determining body in terms of constitutionality in your country. According to Tennessee law, I'm going to read it to you in full. In Tennessee, it is a crime to possess a handgun if you have been convicted of any felony offense, regardless of the nature of the offense. Felon in possession of a handgun is a Class E felony, punishable by 1 to 6 years in prison and a maximum fine of $3,000 US. Wait a minute. Shall not be infringed. Tennessee is infringing on people's right to bear arms. If you're a felon, Isn't that an infringement? Is it or is it not? I'm asking you all. It can be construed to some individuals as that being an infringement on their right. The Second Amendment doesn't mention anything about who exactly. It says the people. Are not felons people? I know they lose a lot of their constitutional rights. But shall not be infringed is something that they always comment to me. Like they just want anybody to be able to walk into a store, go and pick up Ben and Jerry's and a gun. Shall not be infringed. That's all they write. Well, Tennessee is infringing on anyone who's ever committed a felony. Any felony. Felony theft. Felony vandalism. Doesn't have to be violence. Hey, if I sold some drugs and I got busted, I can't own a gun. That's an infringement. Technically, that's an infringement. If we really want to be technical here, I'm just saying. So when they say that red flag laws are a slippery slope, you tell them the slope is already slippery according to their own state laws. Because if you're a felon, apparently they can infringe on your right. So if your parents think you're a danger to the society, if you own or operate or purchase a firearm, it's just one more infringement that's already added to an infringement that already exists. Is it an infringement or is it a guardrail? You know, they say First Amendment, freedom of speech. But then they said, well, you have freedom of speech, but you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Because why? It could cause panic. People could lose their life. They could get trampled, stampeded. It's happened. That's why there's some type of contours, guardrails. So we don't just go out and say anything. Some of us still do. But most of us know not to. So there's guardrails, you all. That's what I'm trying to say. If you focus on potential abuses, you also have to focus on potential benefits. I told you all at the very onset that Florida has said red flag laws in their state have prevented hundreds of gun violence deaths across their entire state. They didn't list out the cities where they prevented it. They just said it's prevented gun violence deaths by the hundreds, according to law enforcement. this recent shooter in Nashville. Their parents wanted to put them on a list. But because Tennessee doesn't have any red flag laws, they could not, even though they wanted to. And so the youth were demanding that something, anything, be done to try and mitigate what's becoming a daily occurrence in this country. The leading cause of death amongst young people in America is gun violence. Now, if you have time to try to protect, safeguard youth from books, drag queens, social media platforms, and the list goes on and on. Young people are like, can you pencil in some time on your legislative calendar to protect us from what's actually the leading cause of our expiration? Can you pencil that into your legislative session? And they were like, no. So then we get to the crazy part. 3 Tennessee lawmakers decided that they wanted to recognize all the people who had come to the Tennessee House to advocate for their own bodily safety when they go to school. They wanted to recognize the people in the gallery who had showed up. The majority party, being that that's the Republican Party right now at the moment in Tennessee, decided that they didn't want to recognize all the citizens of Tennessee who had showed up advocating that gun laws be included in their legislative calendar. They didn't want to recognize it. They wanted to act as though they were invisible. So 3 lawmakers, one who represented the city where the recent shooting occurred, decided they wanted to get into the well and speak out of order. Because generally they're not allowed to speak, is my understanding. Based off of multiple members who work there, who say that the minority is not allowed to speak. Their microphones are literally cut off. So if you know your microphone is going to be cut off, you bring a bullhorn, which is what one of their colleagues in the State House did. And he spoke that way, recognizing the crowd. Now, the Republican supermajority in Tennessee was not happy that this occurred. Quite understandable. They said it's a violation of their house rules. Cool beans. But you all, it's not really an egregious violation of any house rules. It's technically a decorum violation. Now we keep hearing the word decorum, 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 and I wanted to unpack it for you because I think it's important. Because what occurred is unprecedented. So we have to get to why it occurred. Decorum. Behavior in keeping with good taste and propriety. So it wasn't in good taste what they did. Cool beans, we'll roll with that. I disagree with that assessment. But let's play devil's advocate for a minute and say that I agree with the Republicans. What they did violated a decorum rule. Now, if you violate decorum, which is in keeping and good taste, if you violate decorum, there's any number of things that can occur. You can get censured, which gets put into the official record that you did something that was against the rules. You can get fined. You have to pay money. You can be stripped of your committee. Maybe you sit on the education committee and you no longer can be on the education committee. And the most extreme thing that can occur is expulsion. You can be kicked out of the institution you were duly elected to. Now, expulsion is extreme. And by extreme, I mean it's rarely used. And generally, you all, according to all historians, the state of Tennessee, the Tennessee House has never expelled anyone in its entire history for decorum until a couple of days ago, when they did it to 2 legislators who happened to be in the minority. So the Republicans have a supermajority, meaning they can do whatever they want to do to the minority. Now, we know how political parties are. They do this back and forth thing. But even knowing that, you all, nobody had ever been expelled for decorum until 2 days ago in their entire history. There's only been 3 expulsions, period, in Tennessee. 1 for bribery. If you're found guilty of bribery, yeah, kind of grounds for you to either leave on your own or resign or be expelled. 1 for not ratifying an amendment to the Constitution, the 13th or 14th or 15th Amendment, way back when. and another for sexual violence. Nothing about decorum. These are all egregious offenses, worthy of expulsion, in my opinion, the three prior. But decorum, you all. Do we think violations of decorum are worth expulsion from institutions? This is what we're saying now. Look, this is a horrible precedent to set, in my opinion. Whatever your ideological bent is, I don't necessarily agree with expulsions on the basis of decorum. Because decorum is kind of subjective to begin with. What's in good taste to certain people might not be in good taste to others. Give you an example. A member in that body is alleged to have urinated on another member's seat. Do you all think that's in keeping in good taste and behavior? Is that proper decorum? And yet they weren't expelled. A member has been accused credibly by 3 different women of sexual assault when they were underage, and he was their coach. He wasn't expelled, you all. A member ran onto a sports field and yanked down an umpire's pants. They weren't expelled, you all. These are all egregious violations of decorum. But they were before Thursday. So they're in the past. So, you know what they say, there's no sense in crying over spilled milk. I'm a big proponent of that thinking. But you all, specifically you youth, who are witnessing and watching this debauchery take place in Tennessee, I want you all to do me a little favor. And this one is not going to require very much. It's very simple. I want you to get out a piece of paper and have a pencil and pen ready. Because we have a new standard. You all know I have a new principle that I'm operating under this year. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. So it's no sense in crying over spilled milk about the past. But from Thursday onward, we have a new precedent. Decorum. Anyone who violates decorum in the state house, in any state across America, we want the same standards to be applicable. Doesn't matter if you have a supermajority, doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican. The precedent has now been set. Expulsion due to decorum. Remember, I said I think this is crazy, but hey, the Republican Party apparently doesn't. Any state house members who violate decorum They gotta go. We want them expelled. Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, Socialist, Conservative, they gotta go. They violated decorum. And that's of the utmost importance. Decorum is more important than death in Tennessee. So we're going to play it that way. It's like pool. You can either play it northern or southern. We're going to play it southern rules this time. Decorum, y'all. Any member who violates decorum in any state within 72 hours. So if it happens on Monday, they got to be gone by Thursday. Same way you did Representative Justin Jones and Representative Justin Pearson. They got to be gone within 72 hours. DUI, domestic violence, child abuse, drug usage. It violates decorum. You gotta go. You can't serve in the state legislature. And before you say that's harsh or extreme, I agree with you. Look, both representatives who were expelled were freshmen. Meaning they just got there. Now, I don't know about you, but usually at any institution they have orientation. You have to get accustomed to the institution you're just joining or part of. No grace was given for their youth or their status in terms of longevity in the institution. So regardless if this is a freshman member in some state, they gotta go. This is the precedent they've set now. Because if that's not what occurs, then you know what I'm about to say next. I'm going to say that there's double standards. There's one standard for one particular type of legislatures, and then there's a different standard for other legislators. And I wonder why that could be the case. Now, the two that were expelled just happened to be African American. Without any due process, I might add. This wasn't referred to the Ethics Committee where there could have been an investigation of their conduct and behavior and a recommendation given by the Ethics Committee on what should be done. None of that. All of that was bypassed. They must be punished to the fullest extent of this institution's power by our supermajority because they violated decorum. Cool. We're going to hold them to this. So you out there, any member, anywhere, if they do anything, you hit them with that decorum shit. Hey, if the adults are so keen on decorum, we youth, you have to act a certain type of way. You have to hold yourself to high standards. You have to have decorum. Anybody, doesn't matter. They gotta go within 72 hours. Now, as you all know, most of these state legislatures in these states are controlled by Republicans, extremely conservative individuals. And let this be a lesson to folks who say, to young people in particular, especially young people of color, you know, there's this whole weave and narrative out in the ether that says voting is not important. Well, you see what type of abuses in a system can occur when people have power to do it. This was a complete and utter abuse. And it's a further erosion of democratic norms in a supposedly democratic institution. We'll talk more about the Tennessee 3 later. I want to get to this now. You know, conservatives and Republicans have been, for a long time, impugning the decent, hard-working citizens who happen to live in metropolitan cities across this country. We're all thugs, we're all criminals, we're all anarchists, we're this, that, and the other. But on gun violence in particular, they love to talk about cities and how the cities can't control gun violence. A certain particular congresswoman whose employer is the United States House of Representatives loves to mention a certain city, Chicago, and talk about the gun violence in that city. And it's well documented that Chicago does have a gun violence epidemic. No one disputes this. But what they do is very misleading to the citizenry. Conservatives try to act as though gun violence only occurs in certain jurisdictions in this country. Only in major metropolitan cities does gun violence occur. Did you all hear the news out of Rome, Georgia? I'll read the headlines for you. A jealous ex-boyfriend kills Rome woman in murder-suicide. 39-year-old Casey Davis, a mother of 7. This happened 2 days ago in Rome, Georgia. R-O-M-E. Now, if that kind of sounds familiar to you, it's because that's part of a certain congresswoman's congressional district. A congresswoman who's always talking about gun violence in Chicago. But this murder-suicide happened in her congressional district. Inside the drive-thru of a Chick-fil-A. What's my point here? This impugning of major metropolitan cities by conservative politicians to try to act as though gun violence only occurs in cities, but not in their communities, not in their towns, not where they live, not where they represent, is bogus, is bullshit, and you all know it has racial implications and connotations. And I'm quite sick of it because I'm a representative of the city. And I'm not here to pit suburb versus city, rural community versus city. No, none of that shit. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to defend my territory. And if other people want to lob salvos at the city all the time, then I'm going to start drawing and connecting the dots where gun violence is occurring in America. And I guarantee you, it's not just occurring in Chicago. It's not just occurring in Jackson, Mississippi. It's not just occurring in Gary, Indiana. It's occurring in Rome, Georgia, according to this headline. A mother of 7 dead at the hands of a gun and her ex-boyfriend in Rome, Georgia. Now, have you heard that particular congresswoman come out and say anything about this recent gun violence that occurred in her congressional district? Look, if you want to legislate for a jurisdiction thousands of miles away from you, but you have nothing to say for your own congressional district, I find that odd. And that's why I brought it up. Because I guarantee you, Cassie Davis is not the only person who dies of gun violence in suburban America. This is quite common. What's uncommon is it doesn't get reported. Because the narrative that certain loudmouths like to present on the media is that our cities are dangerous. They're crime-ridden. But crime happens in the suburbs too. Look, they gotta stop this. They really do. We gotta focus on the actual issue of prevention and mitigation. Nobody said it's going to stop everything. Let's do a hypothetical. If 600 mass shootings occur each year, and if you implement red flag laws, you can cut it down to 450. Hey, that's 150 shootings that you prevented. So this notion that it's an all or nothing proposition is ludicrous. Because it's about mitigating. Nobody logically thinks that all gun violence will end with a ban on assault weapons, red flag laws, or any other law. No one has said that. What people have said is that it will mitigate some gun violence from occurring. Some lives will be saved. Now you have to be a nitwit to sit there and tell me with a straight face that that's not the case, because Florida has already said it is. And we know who's operating and running the state of Florida. It's not socialist, it's not anarchist. But the Tennessee Senate also expelled a member a little while ago. Now, this member was accused of financial impropriety. Representative Robinson was also from a city sent by her constituents to represent their interests in the state Senate. And she was indicted of these charges. But she hadn't had a trial yet. And the Tennessee Senate, again, supermajority Republican, expelled her without due process. She hadn't been found guilty yet, but they expelled her. She too was African American. Now, this is where it gets to be what I call a pattern and practice of racism. That's the only way we can see this. New York Congressman George Santos was recently at the arraignment hearing outside the courthouse for former President Donald Trump. And he was asked a question. Do you think the president should have been indicted for this crime? And he said, not this crime. You hear the Republicans on television, it's just a financial case. Financial fraud is no big deal anymore in America because Donald Trump is accused of the impropriety. But when this woman in the Tennessee Senate was indicted, prior to her trial, she was expelled by the Republicans. She said, this is against due process. I haven't even been found guilty of these charges and they just are expelling me. Go and look it up. Representative Robinson from another city in Tennessee, the same state. They seem to expel black legislators without due process. But when it comes to Donald Trump, he shouldn't even have been indicted for this crime. Decorum is all of a sudden a big deal for the Republican Party when it comes to black legislators. Apparently you can chase people down the hallway in the United States Congress and harass them at their congressional office door. Apparently you can make videos simulating their assassination. Apparently you can chase your colleagues out of the restroom. Apparently you can go and speak to a crowd. And then they storm the United States Capitol building. None of that is against decorum, you all. But a bullhorn wanting to acknowledge all the people who showed up at the State House demanding some type of action be done on gun violence is a violation of decorum worthy of expulsion. Now, I guess we all must be really colorblind. Because the only people being held to these arbitrary standards of decorum seem to be black legislators in America. Not white legislators. Certainly not conservative white legislators. they're getting away with all types of violations of decorum. Remember, decorum is behavior in keeping with good taste and propriety. So, two things. Yet again, this is another attack on the cities. That's how I see this. Another attack on the cities. Our right as citizens to elect the people we want to represent us and our interests is being stripped away by people who don't live in our communities, who don't represent our interests. And they're taking the unprecedented and extraordinary step of now just removing our representation because they don't like who we're sending to represent us. This is deeply problematic, to say the least, and it will not stand. I want to make that clear. No taxation without representation. Well, currently Memphis and Nashville, part of Nashville, don't have representation. 140 something thousand people are without representation. Because somebody in another part of the state decided they don't particularly like how an area in their state is operating with their representation. As they used to say, tough luck, buttercup. I don't get to tell the rural areas that I don't like your representation, which I don't. So don't start telling us that you don't like our representation and trying to remove it using parliamentarian gimmicks. The Republican Party has opened Pandora's box. And there's no shutting it now. If anybody thinks that that's not going to be done all over the country, what just happened in Tennessee, you're kidding yourself. Politics is already messy. And now they've just made it brutal. Let me be frank and honest. I see this as targeting minority, especially African American representation in cities. I see this as targeting representatives, people of color who are in the legislature, singling them out, waiting for any type of alleged or maybe misconduct to be placed on the individual. And then taking these extraordinary steps of expulsion without any due process, as they would want for white legislators. So from this point on, we're going to start calling it out. Any decorum violations I see, 72 hours, and I'm going to say they have to go. We're not going to talk about the past. We're only going to talk about from this point onward. They got to go. Because this is the standard that white conservative Americans have now set. And make no mistake, this is racialized. That's why I'm using racial terms. Because these extraordinary steps have not taken with white legislators. They're just not. There's been refusal to seat people who were duly elected. Yeah. This continues this, what I call war on the cities. Now they're just going to remove our representation without due process, without the will of the governed and our consent. Look, even if they felt that they were right, that they had done something egregious, it is for the constituents of District 86, I believe, and District 52 in Tennessee to determine their fate of their representatives if they've done something wrong. The state house doesn't unilaterally get to tell the citizens who should and shouldn't represent them. No. This is the kind of bogus parliamentarian gimmicks the supermajority Republican state legislators are doing all across America. And we're taking note. And a lot of people are saying that this is about trying to control the cities. Because you all know, and if you don't know, the cities are the lifeblood of most states. The vast majority of revenue for all these states, Democrat, Republican, red, or blue, is generated from the cities. And now what conservative supermajorities in the state legislatures are doing is trying to control the revenue of the cities. They don't want it to be done by the people who live in the cities. They want it to be done by people who live in rural and suburban areas of the state. They want to control your airports. They want to control your judicial systems. They want to control who your representatives are. Now this is a violation because you have jurisdiction. This is a complete violation, but they're trying to get away with it by saying if we pass a law to strip you of your jurisdictional rights, then it's legal. Now we've seen this movie before somewhere. Where have we seen this? Think back, y'all. Where have we seen where a certain group of people said that if we pass laws to control your jurisdictional rights, then it's legal. This is South African apartheid type of politics that they're playing in America. This is an American apartheid to try to seize control, a hostile seizure of control of our cities, because they quite simply don't like, one, us having jurisdictional power to do what we want in our communities. They think they know best, so they're going to run us from afar. The hell they are. No, it doesn't work that way. South Africa found out it doesn't work that way. And if America is up on its South Africa apartheid bullshit, America is going to find out it doesn't work that way too. I guarantee you. Yeah, in Jackson they've been trying to seize the airport, the state, for a long time. They refuse to give the resources and monetary support to fix the water issue in Jackson. For decades, they knew that the water was contaminated, undrinkable. And the state of Mississippi had the resources to repair it. Money was given from the federal government for that express purpose. But what the state did when they received the money was they gave it to other places and not to Jackson as a form of punishment, because they don't like who's representing Jackson. So if you start out the cities, this is what diabolical, insidious conservatism is about. If you starve out the cities, then you'll create mass and hyper poverty of the residents who live in the city, which in turn will create crime. So then we can say, look at those politicians over there in the cities and all that crime. It's out of control. We need to come in and control your city. Yeah, that's what's been going on in America. Starving out the cities so they can come in and control us. And by control, I don't mean be nice. No, our values are not their values. You can't read certain books. You can't perform certain activities. You can't get health care if you identify a certain type of way. Even though if you don't receive the health care, you will most certainly die. This is the type of control they want for us. And this is why it's important to know who your state senator is. This is why it's important to challenge unconstitutional laws that they're trying to pass in your states. As one resident in South Carolina's 1st Congressional District did. You know, in 2018, there were 30,000 African Americans and South Carolina won in that district. Fast forward 2 years later, and 30,000 African Americans are removed from the district. So it goes from being a competitive district to a safe, solid, conservative district. You just carve out the black people. This is what the Republican Party in South Carolina did. I want people to know. They carved out the black people from the district and put them in a district that was already safe for the Democrats. So they could make South Carolina 1 a solid Republican district. It's called gerrymandering. That's the legal, technical, political terminology for it. One resident said, I'm not having this. I was in this district boundary line 2 years ago, and I still belong to this district boundary line. And she took it to the Supreme Court in her state. And a federal judge recently ruled that she was right. And that judge said those 30,000 African Americans who were removed in 2020 have to be put back into that district. I'm sorry, in 2022 they were removed. In 2020 they were there. They have to be put back in by 2024. The federal judge said they did it for the express purpose of violating the constitutional rights of black Americans. That's what the judge said. This is the kind of things that they're doing. Undemocratic, blatantly racist. You know, some people make the argument that the conservative movement is trying to uphold the status quo. And yes, this is true. And some people say the status quo is white supremacy. And yes, this is true. But I'm going to take it a step further. It's now looking like the Republican Party has done a complete 360. They've come full circle, you all. The party that started off as an abolitionist party to end slavery has become an anti-black party in America. Darn near everything they do nowadays seems like it's to cause harm and vengeance on black Americans in this country. This is the only conclusion I can truthfully come to based off of everything that's occurring, you all. We're witnessing it. And it's because a core element of their base, whether they want to admit it or not, is racist. You know, people say that in Tennessee, they can be walking down the street and hear racial epithets, see Confederate flags. Some people have reported even seeing nooses. Do you think they like former Representative Justin Jones and former Representative Justin Pearson in the State House, having to see them, having to hear from them? No, this is why they quite literally cut the microphone. They won't even allow them to speak. And now they're like, we don't even want to see you. You're expelled from our institution. This is blatant racism, y'all. It's right up in your face. And the cities are going to push back. They're going to start pushing back. They already are, but there's going to be a more forceful and more sustained pushback. And it's no slight against other Americans. I just want to say that. Like I said, I don't want to pit other people against other people, especially citizens. But when you're being vilified, and you have been for so long, and without anyone really standing up for you, then at some point we have to stand up for ourselves. We're sick of the general narrative that our cities are violent, that our cities are crime-ridden, and that Democrat politicians are soft on crime. Look, no Republican should ever utter the word Chicago ever again. Because if the narrative from conservative politicians is Chicago can't solve gun violence, Tennessee can't either. Mississippi can't either. Texas can't either. Florida can't either. Are conservative politicians soft on crime? It appears they are, because they can't solve gun violence. How do you expect a city where millions of people live to solve a problem, where in communities where maybe a few thousand people live, they can't solve the problem? You know, gang violence is a thing in a lot of inner cities. But so is domestic violence a thing in a lot of rural and suburban communities. I guarantee you, and I haven't done any crunching of the numbers, but I guarantee you, just like a lot of gang members and innocent people die of gun violence in cities, wives, girlfriends, women in the South are being killed by gun violence too. It just doesn't make the news like Cassie Davis did. Yeah, she got shot and unalived in a Chick-fil-A drive-thru in Rome, Georgia. You know, this particular congresswoman will talk about the violence in Atlanta. But Rome is not Atlanta. See, so now we're going to start throwing this back on them. You want Chicago to solve a gun violence epidemic when you can't in Rome? If you solve the problem in your community, then you can come in and give us helpful pointers about solving it in the city. But I find it downright repugnant and disgusting that conservative white Americans will berate people who live in cities, minority representation in cities, about gun violence, when they can't do a damn thing about all that gun violence happening in their states, in their jurisdictions, and in their communities. And you can try to sweep it under the rug, hide it under a rock, but we know it happens. We know it happens. And so stop pointing the finger at us when you can't solve it yourself. I think, if I'm really going to be honest, both the Republicans and the Democrats are soft on crime. Americans, your representatives are all soft on crime. No community is spared of gun violence in this country. And so why cherry pick certain communities to highlight it and not others? The only reason I can think of is because of who lives in certain communities and who doesn't. This is very much a black and white issue. Because white white conservative politicians will criticize black politicians in cities while gun violence is occurring in their neighborhoods. As much, or maybe even more. You don't hear about all the wives that shoot their husbands in their homes, husbands that shoot their kids in their homes. You don't hear those stories in middle America, in rural America. But just because you don't hear them doesn't mean it doesn't occur. It does. In large numbers. And conservatives have been like, shh, mum's the word, don't say anything about it. So we can attack those black politicians in the cities who we don't like and say they can't govern their communities and jurisdictions when they can't govern their communities and jurisdictions either. And the youth are saying the gig is up. We want something done. And I wholeheartedly agree with it. Something is going to get done very soon. You know, it's also weird the arguments conservatives make about youth and their rights. They try to make it very hard for young people to vote. If you're a young person, you can't make a determination about what your identity is. But you can go and purchase an AR-15. You have no right to determine what your gender is. You're an adolescent. But hey, you adolescent, go and buy an AR-15 from Sam's Club for me. Complete and utter nonsense. That's what it is. And that's what's been going on, you all. This is another direct attack against the cities, against the people who live in the cities. It's another way to try to usurp power from the people who live in the city. And we're just not going to have it anymore. Look, it's a lot of young people in those districts that don't like what the Republican Party just did in Tennessee. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of those representatives that voted for expulsion of two of their own colleagues on Decorum violations, they might not be in the House very much longer. Because electoral-wise, they might lose their seats. Not all, but some. And I heard the different rationales for why they did it. And not any of the rationales that I heard for expulsion actually made me think, oh, it was warranted. If anything, the rationales they gave for why they did it were actually arguments to warrant that they not do it. One representative said, I wouldn't even have voted for expulsion had you not wanted to be expelled. I said, what is this? How did the individual who's up for expulsion want to be expelled? When your political party is the party that filed the motion for expulsion. Representative Farmer, I believe, is the individual who brought up these trumped up charges of expulsion on 3 of his colleagues, 2 of which did get expelled, 1 narrowly survived. So how are you going to blame the individuals up for expulsion for their own expulsion vote when they didn't bring the motion to expel your fellow conservative colleague, Representative Farmer, did? So if you were against expulsion, you should have gone to the individual who brought the measure up and told them, you know, I think expulsion is a little too much. Censure, removal of committees, fines, yeah. But expulsion, that's being dramatic and extreme. It's never happened before on Decorum. We shouldn't set that precedent if you were really opposed to it. But for now on, we're going to monitor Decorum in all of these state houses. And if anybody breaks Decorum, whether it be inside the house or outside the house, because what Representative Robinson did wasn't inside the Tennessee Senate. Her bribery or financial issues occurred as a result of a business she was operating. I think even prior to her becoming a senator. I'll have to look into all of those details. But I said when that happened, I made a mental note of it. I said, this woman is not receiving due process. Sure, she was indicted, but she hadn't had any trial. She hadn't been found guilty. And the Republicans in haste decided to expel her. Because she was a black woman representing a city who they politically disagreed with. And now they've done it in the state house. I said when they did it in the state senate, this is problematic. She's not receiving due process. Now they've expelled 2 more black legislators in their house without due process on even more minuscule circumstances like Decorum. Next up, I think if you sneeze the wrong way, if you're a black legislator in Tennessee, they'll expel you. This is blatantly racist, Tennessee, and we all see it. And you in Tennessee who are outraged about it, continue to protest. Continue to raise a ruckus about this, because we all know it's not right. It's racist. That's what it is, Tennessee. And you know how it is. If you don't say anything about it, put it to you this way. If you don't acknowledge a problem exists, a true problem exists, does it just go away because you don't acknowledge that it doesn't exist? We know it doesn't work that way. What happened to Representative Robinson in the Tennessee Senate was undemocratic. She should have had her trial, and if a jury of her peers found her guilty, she should have had the opportunity to either resign or then the state senate take measures of expulsion. What happened to Representative Justin Jones and Representative Justin Pearson was undemocratic. They should have been notified that expulsion was going to be an option for them. There should have been due process, meaning this shouldn't have been a political mechanism decided by the Republican Party. It should have been referred to the Ethics Committee, where it could have been properly investigated, and there could have been a determination made about what the punishment was outside of a supermajority political party. Because now it looks like one political party is just trying to remove their opposition, silence their opposition on minuscule, insignificant things like decorum. I guarantee you a lot of House of Representatives members, if this standard is applicable in the state, it should be applicable nationally. Congress members shouldn't be able to just chase out of the restroom other colleagues, send death threats to other colleagues, make insensitive comments to other colleagues. That's a violation of decorum. You shouldn't be able to go and incite a mob to attack your own nation's capital. That's a violation of decorum. But it happened in the past. So moving forward, we're going to start tracking and monitoring. Anybody violates decorum, they got to be expelled. I want to see white conservative legislators do what they do to black legislators in America. That's all I'm asking for, the same standard. You didn't afford Senator Robinson any due process, but you want us to afford Donald Trump due process. He's innocent until proven guilty, even though he's been indicted. He should still be allowed to even be president, according to most of them. But Senator Robinson, who was indicted on financial issues, she had to be expelled from the Tennessee Senate. I kind of can see why people say it's racialized. Because there's no other way to see it. It's clear as day. And we're going to play the rules the same way they're playing it. No different. All of this is going to be remembered. It's definitely going to be remembered. And I'm one of those individuals that doesn't say, oh, well, you know, they shouldn't have done it, and we shouldn't either. No. If this is the rules that the Republican, conservative, white America is setting, then it's incumbent on us as progressives, socialists, and liberal Americans to play by the same standards and rules. And we are. I think the founder of Moms Demand Action, Shannon Watts, she said the gloves are off. Yeah. Oh yeah, the gloves are off now. The gloves are completely off. This was an egregious violation of a parliamentarian rule for the sole purpose of punishing residents who they already punish in so many ways, but now they're removing their representation. If the Tennessee House refuses to seat Representative Justin Jones and Representative Justin Pearson, then we should escalate this. Legally, I'm sure they will. But as citizens, we have to respond too. Because it's an affront and attack on us and our communities. You're not going to tax the cities and the residents and the people who live in the cities. I'm talking to the conservative white American. You're not going to tax the people who live in the cities. And we don't have our representation we want. Oh, no. You had a whole Boston Tea Party about that. That's a big deal. You had mass civil unrest about that. There was absolutely no decorum in this country about that issue. No taxation without representation. So we're going to sit on our hands and we're not going to give you one red hot goddamn penny, pardon my French, for anything. We're going to shut it down. And there are different modalities and ways to do that. But we'll wait to see if they get seated or not to go that far. Because if they start to violate who we want to have as our representatives, then we're going to violate their money that we generate for their salaries. Yeah, the cities generate money for white suburban conservative Americans to ride around in Ford F-150s, to have big suburban homes, while we live under viaducts and in tents on the sidewalk. So we're frustrated and we're done and we're not having this anymore. And it's going to be just like that. And like I said, this is not about pitting citizen versus citizen. It's about defending our territory, our rights. They would do the same thing. If the cities were infringing on the suburbs, on rural communities, expelling members because we didn't like their political views, how they operated, they would be rightfully upset and justified. And so now they have to understand our rightful anger. And like I said, this has been going on for a long time. What happened to Senator Robinson happened maybe a year or 2 years ago. And I made a mental note of it then. I said, this woman did not get any due process. Sure, she was indicted. But indictment is not an indication of guilt. They don't want that to be the standard for Donald Trump. So why was it a standard for Senator Robinson? It's not the Tennessee 3, it's the Tennessee 4. The media needs to bring on former Senator Robinson. And if she was found guilty of it, so be it. But they removed her before her trial. They violated her rights and her citizens' rights before her guilt or innocence was proven. You all, we cannot have this. We can't have this. It can't stand. And I don't think it will be allowed to stand. This is what happens when there's that narrative of telling folks not to remain vigilant. Our vote is our voice. Young people, understand this. When they tell you don't vote, those are people who want to control you and your life. Because they're going to vote. And they want you not to. So they win and you lose. Our vote is our voice. It is the only way in a civilized society to remain vigilant against tyrannical tyranny from occurring. A tyranny of the majority against the minority. That's what you saw on full display in Tennessee. Tyrannical authoritarian power utilized because it could be. Due to what I'm calling American apartheid. The media calls it gerrymandering because they don't want to really call it what it is. It's apartheid. The way they make Swiss cheese out of the districts and cherry pick who they want to be in their district. We'll move these 30,000 black people out so this conservative white politician can win in this district easily. Hey, a federal judge said that about South Carolina 1, not me. Don't ever take my word for this. Listen to the experts. But I know this is what's occurring. We all do. People just don't want to say it. They're afraid to say it. They're afraid to admit how blatantly racist this is. Systemic racism was on full display in Tennessee. The representative who survived by one vote, they asked her, why do you think you survived? And she said it could possibly have something to do with the color of my skin and that I'm a white woman. And the representatives who they expelled were black. She didn't definitively say it was because, like any good crime scene, you don't want to leave a trace of evidence. But the best they could do was decorum. Tennessee says you can't serve in their state house because of decorum. Yet I guarantee you, and you can ask Representative Andrew Farmer this, did he support President Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020? Decorum? Really? And their standard bearer of their whole entire political party is Donald Trump? Just take a browse through his Twitter feed. There's a lot of decorum there, I'm certain of it. No, we know why this occurred. We know full well. And there's going to be a price to pay. Like, conservatives, this is another thing. They think they can get away with this. For now, because they have the majority, they can. But there's going to be a long-term price to pay for this. This is blatant racism. And it's not lost on me that April is Confederate Heritage Month in the South. Somebody said they're just keeping up with the tradition. Sadly, that's what it appears to look like. But apparently they didn't learn from that whole story. You do know that the Confederacy lost, right? They keep saying the South will rise again, the South will rise again. Well, the South might rise, but it's probably going to rise with people like Representative Justin Jones and Representative Chesney Peterson at the helm, not Representative Andrew Farmer. That I'm most certain of. And I think they'll be back in the State House very soon. But let this be a lesson that we must exercise vigilance. We must properly vet who these candidates are. We must know about their background. Some candidates make that difficult by providing hush money to adult film stars to keep quiet about extramarital affairs, but things get out. You know, the legendary reporter Ronan Farrell reported about the doorman being given hush money to keep quiet about the secret child back in 2018. But sometimes we're not paying enough attention and we're not remaining vigilant. And that's when undemocratic things can occur due to our lack of vigilance. So I hope now that the young people are engaged and aware that they'll take action. And I think they will. Nobody's going to forget this. The Republican Party can forget people forgetting this. Nobody's going to forget this blatant racism, this move to be anti-black at all expense as a political party, the vow and hatred they're sending towards the LGBTQIA community, and the maligning of individuals who live in metropolitan cities, the constant maligning and impugning of our integrity as citizens. We're tired of that too. if our cities are crime ridden, all of our communities are crime ridden. People don't just commit crimes in the city. Gun violence doesn't just occur in Chicago. It happens in Rome, Georgia, too. 7 children are going to be raised without a mother now due to gun violence in a certain particular congresswoman's congressional district who's always speaking about Chicago. Okay? This is a fact. So we're going to go tit for tat now. We're not going to take it anymore. We've had enough, as those representatives said. And I thought that that was very poignant, what they said. We've had enough. We've had enough of the neglect in our cities, of the theft of resources in our cities, of the maligning of our integrity in our cities, and now the hostile takeover of our property. The airport in Jackson is Jackson's airport. It's located in Jackson, Mississippi. It is not the state of Mississippi's airport. If they want an airport, they can build their own airport in their community. But you can't come and take what's already in a community and make it yours. That's apartheid. And we're going to call it that. And you know how well that went in South Africa. I think they're still dealing with the remnants and effects of it. I don't think this country wants to go from slavery to hundreds of years of racial and domestic terrorism to now legislative apartheid. I don't think this country wants to go through that. But if certain elements of this country do, which I think is the case, then you're going to see us vehemently fighting, just like we did before, again. We have to remain vigilant about a tyrannical majority exercising authoritarian control over the minority. This is how democracies become unraveled. This is the slippery slope. They didn't do anything about the 6 deaths. They say they were powerless to do anything about that. But you see how quickly and with how much vigor they were able to move on decorum. Apparently, decorum is worse than death. It's greater than death, however you want to put it. There's a greater significance in the state of Tennessee to move on violations of decorum than to solve gun violence, to mitigate gun violence. That's what the Republicans are saying. But we know it wasn't about decorum violation. own colleagues to speak, when you won't allow your own colleagues to present bills to be debated on, then it's almost like you're not a part of the institution to begin with. They say that the two representatives they expelled never assimilated to the institution. One could argue the institution never wanted them to assimilate. They cut their microphones. They wouldn't even allow them to speak. One of the representatives said when he returned back to the House floor, his microphone was deactivated. They told them they had to be out of their legislative offices prior to close of business the day they were expelled. They had to hurry up and clean their offices. This is the type of workplace that they were in. Anyone else would consider that to be a hostile working environment. You heard how Representative Andrew Farmer even spoke to his fellow colleague. He insinuated that he was an adolescent based off of his behavior. Now that in itself has racial connotations, because we all know that at one point in this country, racist Anglo-Saxon men used to consider black men not entirely men, 3/5. Then they would call grown men boys. Representative Andrew Farmer is a deeply problematic individual. I'm just going to put it at that. And you all know how the universe works with karma. It always comes back around. Didn't something come out about the sponsor of the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida? Every dog gets its day. That's all I'm going to say about Representative Farmer. What goes around comes back around. He's so quick to expel his own colleagues based off of decorum. One would hope his decorum is up to standards and par. But generally, people who don't even know how to speak to other people properly, even when they vehemently disagree with them, generally people like that are not nice people. And generally, not nice people go around abusing other people. So he's all about decorum, you all. So you young people, make sure that he stays and abides by decorum. Hey, what's good for the goose is good for the gander.